Did you know that on average, by the time that a player reaches Platinum, they will have played 860 matches to get there? By the time that they reach Ascendant, they will have played 1,403 matches. And by the time that these players hit Radiant, they will have played 3,442 matches. That's pretty discouraging. Players hanging out in Ascendant and Immortal Elo likely feel heavily that they are approaching Radiant, but in reality, they're not even halfway there yet. A common misconception with Valorant coaching is that when you pay for a session or buy a course, you're just going to suddenly rank up. But the reality is that there's a lot of mechanical skill involved in Valorant. It's not just enough to know what to do, you have to constantly practice how to do it as well. This is one of the most difficult feedback loops to overcome for lower elo players because oftentimes you can make the correct decision but still lose the round just because you're not good enough yet. And in a society where we're conditioned to basically want immediate gratification for everything we do, this can sometimes make ranking up feel nearly impossible. Let's say, for example, you invest an hour a day, 5 days a week into improving at Valorant. In a year, you'll have spent 261 hours on the game, which means that you will have landed yourself in gold. You'd be around gold. If you're wondering how I got these statistics, by the way, we recently ran a poll on our channel asking players to submit their stats from tracker.gg, including the rank they're in, their playtime, as well as a bunch of other things that I'm going to share with you today, such as average headshot percentage, KDA, hours spent in deathmatch, and main role played. Massive shout out to both Wade and Pilkin from the Rocket League community, who very clearly gave me a ton of inspiration for this video, as well as Teats TV for helping me poll enough people to at least get somewhat accurate data. Together, we were able to get over 1,300 responses, which is actually pretty insane. A lot of these responses we had to throw out just due to inaccuracies. Well, some of them were inaccuracies, some of them were just liars. For example, this guy who said that he had a 9 KD. Or in this guy's case, who apparently has played double the amount of hours in Valorant than actual games. Those must be really long matches. Overall, though, we've got some really awesome data to share with you guys that could provide a ton of insight into if you're climbing super fast for your rank or maybe a bit slower, as well as some other really eye-opening things if you're interested in improving as fast as possible. We ended up running this poll in brackets just to narrow down the response options, so keep in mind these numbers are going to provide a very large range, but they should still give a decent estimate on what to expect for each rank bracket. Basically, just assume these numbers would be to hit the midpoint of each bracket. So in this case, you can expect the average player to hit Bronze 1 in around 114 hours of competitive. This comes out to around 198 games played. I think for players with a ton of FPS experience, this is probably really mind-blowing to them. CS2 just came out, and as someone who's put thousands of hours into Valorant, I can confidently say that I probably rank out of the Iron equivalent pretty fast in placements alone. But you'd be surprised to know that the reality is, for people who are new to FPS titles, and even just games in general, it's actually a really steep learning curve for players to pick up the three-dimensional movement. The concept of moving your mouse to direct your character just isn't something that most people pick up right away, and when you factor in how precise that you have to be in this game, it can be a really rough battle. This is going to sound funny, but recently my friend's mom has been trying to pick up Valorant as her very first video game, and I played a match with her. Keep in mind, I'm a professional coach. Like, coaching new players is what I do for a living. There is nothing I could have told her to make her play better this early on. She literally just had to get more comfortable with the game before anybody could step in and direct her. This makes a ton of sense too, because when you factor in the average KD of these players, it was around 0.87 with a 13% headshot percentage. Now, my friend's mom could only dream of having a 13% headshot percentage, but after all, this is an average, and she was definitely at the bottom end of the bell curve. Actually, an alarming statistic for me as a coach was that out of 247 responses from Iron to Bronze players, 185 of them considered themselves fill players, meaning that they try to adapt their team comp around their teammates. Ooh, this is really rough because these players only have 100 hours played. If they're dividing that among 3 to 4 agents, they're really just not going to learn the game as quickly as they could. This is actually where platforms like SkillCapped come in handy. It's such a simple fix that could have easily saved these players time, but they just don't know these things because it's not their job to know these things. There are proper practices to improve the game as quickly as possible, and that's how our platform is designed to save you time. You're going to have to still play the game, but on average, we find that our students actually rank up twice as fast as the averages that you see here. So instead of spending 300 hours in gold, you could easily be soaring into platinum and diamond in no time. Don't just take our word for it though, we offer a money back guarantee, so if you don't improve, you don't pay. Time is the most valuable thing that a person can have, so don't waste your time practicing suboptimally. We've got courses that will teach you all of the fundamentals in just an hour and get you on your way to Immortal today. The players who could benefit the most from this actually though are in our next bracket, silver and gold. This is actually the group of players that we got the most responses from, which makes sense because it's the rank that most players are in. On average, players in Silver and Gold have played 286 hours or otherwise 492 matches. I've always said that if you put in anything less than 60 hours into an act, you didn't really play that act, and this kind of adds up when we look at these numbers. Most of these players have a little bit of time invested into the game, and they probably know all of the agents and their abilities, but they still haven't really mastered the fundamentals. If you were to take a Gold player and try to teach them the concept of the game, they'd probably be able to actually understand what you're saying and apply it somewhat effectively. This is actually shown by the increase in stats, with their headshot percentage rising up to 16.4% and their average KDE bumping all the way up to 1.0. You know, one of the crazy things that we actually saw in this pool was that controller is actually the most mained role across all ranks. Of 485 players in Silver and Gold who filled out this survey, 151 of them actually considered themselves to be controller mains. If I had to guess, I would probably say this is a result of a bias in our audience, since most players watching guides are probably a bit more willing to play strategically rewarding characters. But it is still really weird to me that this was consistent across all ranks. The least played role in this bracket was actually Initiator, which kind of makes sense. Initiator is a role that really relies on your teammates to capitalize on your utility, and in these ranks, that probably doesn't happen all that often. I would much rather play Yoru than Breach in these ranks, and it seems like a lot of people feel that same way. There is one key statistic, though, that is trending upwards right now that we will talk about in the next section, so stay tuned. For Platinum and Diamond, the hours rise pretty steadily up to 501 hours or 860 matches on average. Once you have this many hours in the game, you'd probably consider yourself pretty adept, but you actually are only 1/4 of the way to Radiant. That is a steep curve. That's okay though, lots of these players actually have really cracked aim and mechanics, but what we most often see in our coaching sessions is that these players miss the bigger picture during their matches. Something that sticks out to me about the responses that we got from this rank is that out of 338 submissions, only 57 of these players actually played Sentinels. I've been playing a lot of Killjoy recently in order to help a student that I've been coaching, and something that's crazy to me is how much value this role can get simply by existing. It's a bit of a stretch, but it's very likely that these players overvalue mechanics and undervalue utility. In fact, if you compare the average KD of a Platinum or Diamond player to an Ascendant or Immortal player, it's actually only a 0.02 difference, which really isn't that much. Headshot percentage is a slightly different story, but the common trend that we've seen across all ranks so far that you're really going to want to hear is that as the ranks go up, so does the amount of time spent in deathmatch. It is a pretty steady increase from Iron to Diamond, which basically signifies that most of this increase just comes down to increased overall playtime, but what you're about to see in Ascendant is actually pretty crazy. By the time that they've hit Ascendant or Immortal, they've played around 807 hours or just over 1,400 competitive matches. This means on average you have to play a little over 2 hours every day for a year to hit Immortal 1. As we mentioned, headshot percentage and KDA continue to rise slightly as we go up in ranks, but what you'll notice is that for the first time out of our 144 responses, all of the roles are pretty evened out. Part of the reason I initially requested people to submit their main role was actually because I expected as people climb in rank, more people would consider themselves duelist mains, but it seems like that's not the case. This is the healthiest balance that we've seen across all ranks, so good job guys, you really left me impressed on this one. As mentioned though, the most striking thing about this rank comes down to the hours spent in deathmatch. Although it was a pretty steady increase from Iron to Diamond, you're about to see a steep spike up to 131 hours. That is an 129% increase. The best way to compare this is by looking at the increase in competitive hours, which actually only ends up going up by 61%. This makes it very clear that as players get into higher ranks of the game, they are valuing game modes like deathmatch and team deathmatch much more highly. We also see a pretty steady increase in team deathmatch hours, but since the game is so new, there really isn't super solid data on that. It is pretty safe to assume though that both game modes are very good for practice, since even the top level of players are using these game modes very frequently. In these upper ranks, you're seeing a fairly high average headshot percentage of 21.62%, which is very telling of the mechanical prowess of the top ranks in Valorant. You've got to learn to hit your headshots, and these are players who have done the heavy lifting of really honing their mechanics in game. As mentioned, there isn't a massive KDA difference between this bracket and the last one, but that's pretty much to be expected. The higher rank that you get, the better players you're playing against. It's not like every player in Immortal is dropping 30 every game, and actually in many ways it even becomes harder to frag because these players are better at trading out their kills. Similarly, headshot percentage can be even higher in lower ranks at times because when players are less experienced, their movement is worse, so they're easier to headshot. Finally, getting into the rank you've all been waiting for though, in Radiant, the average amount of hours played is nearly 2,000 hours with nearly 3,500 games played. That is over double what it took for our Ascendant Immortal bracket, which is absolutely crazy. When you hit Immortal, you are the top 1% of players in Valorant. Radiant is the top 0.03%, meaning that to get that extra 1%, you need to double your playtime. This is actually really consistent with what you hear from other industries though. For example, if you never worked out in your life, you'd see significant gains from even just spending 1 to 2 hours in the gym a week. However, if you're trying to get absolutely shredded, you're going to have to do things like change your diet, spend multiple hours a week lifting, get proper sleep. It could basically require you to switch up your whole lifestyle. In Valorant, I can personally attest to this. I am a peak Immortal 3 player because quite frankly, it's just really hard to commit to the Radiant grind. By the time that you get deep into an episode, to hit Radiant, you sometimes need to not only gain that 450 RR required to get there, but you also need to gain an additional 200 RR just to meet that top 500 mark because it's just that competitive. To put that into perspective, if you're Immortal 1, it's basically the equivalent of climbing from Gold 1 all the way up to Diamond 1 based off of RR alone. Now, when you factor in the difficulty of playing against literally the best players in the game, yeah, it makes sense why it takes so long. When we look at Radiants, they also spend even more time in Deathmatch, averaging 250 hours played in Deathmatch alone. So, in other words, Radiants have spent more time playing Deathmatch than most Silvers have spent playing in competitive. Finally, although we did have a smaller sample size for Radiants, naturally, something we did see is that there were more duelist mains in Radiant compared to every other role. This is actually the only rank where controller wasn't the most played role, but it's also a small sample size, so it's hard to say. That being said, if we look at the ladder, pretty consistently the top 10 players are all locking a ton of duelists, so it doesn't seem too far off base. Not to say it's not possible to hit rank 1 as any other agent, people have done that plenty of times, but it's something to think about. Beyond just ranks though, we did gather some other interesting data. This is something I brought up in other videos, but it was fun to confirm in our poll that it does seem like on average, duelist players do have a higher KDA. This makes sense, of course, duelist players often are on the front lines and their utility is basically meant to help them get kills, but it's nice at least to have it confirmed by our research as well. In fact, duelist was the only role that ended up having a positive overall KDA, which is a bit interesting. Other roles were pretty close, but duelist was technically the only one over 1.0. So if your KDA is a bit low right now, just know that it might have something to do with the role that you're playing. And if you ever thought about if players are inherently selfish, you can sleep well tonight, because it does seem like at least most of the players actually favored filling for their team rather than insta-locking specific agents. Now, it is possible that everyone goes through phases where they insta-lock, but it's nice knowing that even though it may not feel like it, most people are interested in being a team player. Alright though guys, before we wrap this up, let me tell you a little bit more about SkillCapped. So we offer a 5-division rank up guarantee, and we think that's a pretty crazy thing to offer. It's like a gym membership guaranteeing that you'll get ripped. Your local gym would go bust if they offered you that. Not us though. We offered this for years because our service really does work. It works so well, in fact, that we are able to produce by far the largest catalog of premium Valorant guides on the internet. We add new courses every month. With over 1,000 Valorant guides curated into over 50 courses, no one can compare. We also have a direct line of communication with subscribers in our Discord so that you can get connected immediately to some of the best players in the game who will respond to all of your questions asked. Sign up today for as little as $6.99 a month if you are serious about improving. So that's going to be all for this one today. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.